establishing the Ленд-Лиz initiative to help the people of Ukraine and the people of Eastern Europe fight for democracy. We're very proud of this legislation, which will now go to the President for his signature.
And this piece of legislation will do just that. It'll empower them to select the weapons that they want. It'll empower them in a timely fashion to obtain those. So this is one important piece of not just military victory, but humanitarian necessity.
Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, for your leadership in leading this really important delegation. We have heard over and over the stories of the atrocities, the human rights violations, the violations of international law, the systematic raping of young women and children, the carpet bombing of civilian populations, the targeting of maternity wards, the intentional blocking of food aid to induce hunger and starvation around the world. To be clear, Vladimir Putin will not stop any of this until the Ukrainians stop him. They have the courage, they have the ferocity, they have the prowess to do it, but what they don't yet have are all of the weapons. So we came with a very singular, focused message. The United States of America will help you stop it. We are in this to win it. We will provide you the aid, we will provide you the weapons to beat Vladimir Putin and to win this victory, not just for Ukraine, but for the United States and the entire free world.
There you go. Done. Last week, President Biden signed a bill that I introduced along with Senators Wicker, Cardin, and Shaheen, which was called the Ukraine Democracy Ленд-Лиz Act. This legislation is rooted in the same Ленд-Лиz legislation that President Roosevelt signed into law in 1941, which allowed the United States to supply Great Britain and other allies with military equipment. At that time, President Roosevelt vowed to transform the United States into what he called the arsenal of democracy, and the Ленд-Лиz Act helped accomplish that. This legislation, the Ukrainian Democracy Ленд-Лиz Act, which has now been signed into law by President Biden, cuts red tape so we can quickly give Ukraine what it needs to win.
John Ismay.
Hi there. One of my Capitol Hill colleagues flagged that there's a Ленд-Лиz bill for Ukraine that may be heading to the president's desk for signature later this week. And I want to know if there's been any discussion about how this could possibly offer any additional permissions that the Pentagon doesn't already have now.
John, great question, but I'm not going to get ahead of pending legislation, and I'm certainly not going to get ahead of the president's decision with respect to that. What our focus is right now is on meeting our responsibilities under the presidential drawdown authorities that we're executing as we speak, and looking ahead about future drawdown authority and what that could look like, working with Congress. And I don't want to get ahead of where we are in the decision-making process. Clearly, one of the things the Secretary took away from his time both with President Zelensky in Kyiv as well as in Ramstein with 40 nations represented is that Ukraine does still have acute needs. There is a lot that the nations around the world can do to meet those needs, and we're going to keep looking for creative solutions to do that. But I'm just not going to get ahead of the legislative process right now.
Oh, thanks, John. I'd like to return to Ukraine for a moment. A couple of days ago, I covered the moment when Congress just approved the Ленд-Лиz Act for Ukraine, and they're told about the political importance of this. But I'd like to ask you about the military perspective. Do you have any plan or any strategy, which equipment, which arms might be provided to Ukraine using the Ленд-Лиz? What will be the difference between, foreign military sales or foreign military aid? And does it mean that, for example, like it was during the Second World War, that arms will go separately and something like lorries, like Humvees, will go through Ленд-Лиz?
Yeah. So It's pending legislation. The president hasn't signed it yet, so I'm not going to get ahead of the president here. If and when he signs that, then it becomes law, and then we'll execute it, and then I'm sure we'll be able to talk about it in more detail. What I can talk about is what we're doing right now. And what we're doing right now is continuing to send over the weapons and material of the last two presidential drawdown authorities, what we're calling 7 and 8, which was very, very focused on artillery particularly, and some radar capabilities, as well as some unmanned capabilities. The kinds of things that we know that they need because they've told us they need in the Donbass and in the South. And so that's what we're focused on right now, and I just don't want to get ahead of legislation that hasn't been signed into law by the president. Yeah.
Just separately, the Ленд-Лиз Act is supposed to be signed into law in the coming days. Can you talk about how that's going to change things here at the Pentagon? I mean, they say it's going to make it easier for the U.S. to get equipment and weapons to Ukraine, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit before. It's not signed into law, and so unless or until the president decides to sign that, we're going to refrain from commenting on it. I would just back out a little bit and say, number one, we really do genuinely appreciate the support that we've gotten from Congress to allow us to continue to support Ukraine. And the president, as you saw just last week, asked for another $33 billion, $16 billion of which would affect the department specifically. And as you heard the secretary say, we urge the Congress to act quickly on that so that we can keep providing this support in an uninterrupted way. Additional support legislated by Congress and approved by the president certainly is going to be helpful. Any additional support that we can provide Ukraine is going to be helpful, but I'm going to refrain from speaking to the specifics of that pending legislation unless or until the president signs it.
Does that Ленд-Лиз legislation make it possible to send stuff without any money from Congress?
I think I'll let the president speak for this, and I think there'll be more. He'll have more to say on this later today. I don't want to get ahead of the president. I would just say that any support that we get from Congress, and Congress has been very supportive, but any additional support we get from Congress in terms of security assistance to Ukraine is welcome, and we'll work inside that. Gordon.
Thank you, John. Because it's a great public interest in Ukraine, I have to return to my question I tried to discuss with you last week. It was too early, obviously. Right now, after President Biden signed the Ленд-Лиз for Ukraine Act, what's the situation from the Pentagon point of view? Do you have any plan how, the aid will be separated between the foreign military sales and possibly...
Yeah, we're still, I think, look, we're still analyzing the Ленд-Лиz Act to determine exactly, specifically, what authorities and what capabilities it will help us provide. I would, remind that in many cases, it's going to require some bilateral agreements between the United States and Ukraine. That's what Ленд-Лиz is about. And when through Ленд-Лиz, when an item is given to a country, they're responsible for, either returning it and maintaining it and returning it, and or providing compensation for it should it not be able to be returned. And so there's, for each item under Ленд-Лиz, you've got to work through that agreement. So we're still analyzing all the authorities now that the act, now the law will give us, and we're certainly going to act in accordance with the law, certainly within the spirit and the intent of it, but it's just too early to know with granularity exactly what that's going to mean. In the meantime, however, we continue to urge Congress to pass the president's supplemental request, which he asked for $33 billion. $5 billion of that would include drawdown authority, additional drawdown authority, so that we can continue uninterrupted providing things out of our own stocks. Yeah. Tom.
Hi, John. Just an issue of Ленд-Лиz. It's very interesting. Should you have an open evening sometime to go back and see which nations actually have repaid the United States for the Ленд-Лиz Act of World War II.
Have you?
I have. It's
And the number is?
one.
One.
Yeah.
Who?
Great Britain.
Okay.
The Soviet Union, now Russia, has not, just parenthetically. My question is not about Ленд-Лиz, however. Yesterday you
I don't have any open evenings either, so.
I know that. So I guess it was a rhetorical offering.
Yeah.
I want to move on to Ukraine. 60 days has passed since the president signed the Ленд-Лиz Act. So when is the administration going to come out with a mechanism in terms of describing how that will work?
I think we're still looking at the Ленд-Лиz authorities and what they provide, and we're grateful for Congress for that piece of legislation. Clearly, it was passed in a bipartisan way. Clearly indicates the degree to which members on Capitol Hill value the kind of support that we're giving to Ukraine and want to make sure that we can continue to do that. They also recently just passed a $20 billion supplemental piece of legislation that not all, but a lot of it goes to security assistance. What we're focused on is in real time doing what we can to help Ukraine defend itself.
Can we expect it in a matter of days or weeks?
Well, just on Friday, the president signed another $400 million out in presidential drawdown authority. We have a lot of authorities already available to us, and we're using them.
Я вас, напевно, розчарую, тому що остаточне розуміння, як буде виглядати Ленд-Лиз, народиться, тому що наші партнери остаточно ще саму модель не завершили її, скажімо так, формувати. Тобто прийнято принципове рішення, що так, Ленд-Лізу бути, прийнято принципове рішення – це визначений об'єм грошей по цій програмі, і прийнято принципове рішення, що на ці гроші Україна зможе придбавати те, що їй потрібно для перемоги в цій війні.
Давайте відповімо на це запитання. Чи потрібен нам Ленд-Лиз, де він, що з ним відбувається, чи є вже процедури і так далі?
Дякую, що запитали, тому що, мені здається, у нас по Ленд-Лізу дуже багато є нерозуміння, що це і як він працює. Ленд-Лиз нам буде потрібен тоді, коли Конгрес не буде виділяти нам на президентські виділення кошти. Тобто по Ленд-Лізу ми зможемо отримувати від Сполучених Штатів те, що у них вже є у власності. Зараз ми це отримуємо безкоштовно через президентські дропдауни, тобто нам його дарують. Наприклад, коли у нас не буде коштів, а буде обладнання, яке ми хочемо отримати, ми зможемо застосовувати Ленд-Лиз. І зараз ми активно обговорюємо саме механізми, як це може бути. Тому що Ленд-Лиз – це фактично ті ж самі виділення з власних наявностей, але які даються в оренду чи в лізинг, тобто на вже якісь іншій основі, а не безкоштовні. Тому поки у нас є безкоштовна можливість отримувати, звичайно, ми будемо її використовувати.
Another question. President Biden signed Ленд-Лиz back in May. It's a new fiscal year. Are there plans to use Ленд-Лиz in any way to transfer weaponry, or are you sticking with drawdown in USAI at this point?
Okay, so I'll take the Ленд-Лиz one first. So we appreciate Congress's support for Ukraine with the Ленд-Лиz legislation. However, right now we're really focused on presidential drawdown and using that as our primary authority for being able to provide equipment directly from U.S. military stocks, because unlike Ленд-Лиz, it doesn't have any provisions that would require, reimbursement for, say, damaged equipment and that sort of thing. So we're sticking with PDA for now.
And by the way, we've not given Ukraine a blank check. There's a lot of things that Ukraine wants we didn't do. For example, I was asked very much whether we'd provide American aircraft to guarantee the skies over Ukraine. I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to get into a third world war taking on Russian aircraft and directly engage, but would we provide them with all the rational ability to defend themselves? Yes. We try those HIMARS. Well, the HIMARS, there's two kinds of, but in the average person's parlance, rockets you can drop in those. One that goes over 600 miles and one that goes about 160 miles. We didn't give many ones that go to 600 miles because I'm not looking for them to start bombing Russian territory. And so we want to make sure that there's a relationship that they're able to defend themselves and take on what is purely the ugliest aggression that's occurred since World War II on a massive scale. on the part of Putin within Ukraine. And there's so much at stake. So I would be surprised if Leader McCarthy even has a majority of his Republican colleagues who say they're not going to fund the legitimate defensive needs of Ukraine.
I thought President Zelensky was very powerful, as many of you watched. He made the case very strongly. When you think about what President Biden should do, I think there's a bipartisan movement right here. Provide them the MiGs. Provide them the planes where they can create a no-fly zone. Provide them the armament that they need to continue to fight a war that they did not create. I thought the video was one of the most moving moments in there. Made the case of the murdering of innocent people, that war crimes are being committed, that America and the world cannot sit by and ignore. We need to put a stop to this. And I think greater pressure, greater armament, and why the MiGs were not provided weeks ago, as many of us requested, put them at a disadvantage.
Is there any scenario where a no-fly zone, the no-fly zone that he requested, would be supported by you and by the United States?
Look, I think right now, provide them the MiGs that they can create a no-fly zone. The entire time speaking with those in Ukraine and the president himself, he's never asked for American men or women to be in a battle. All he's ever asked for is give us the opportunity to defend ourselves. Don't let us fight with sticks. I've had conversations with the president long before this moment came. My advice to him was provide them the armament earlier to deter Putin from ever making this decision. And the entire time, President Biden always said it would be the sanctions afterwards. And then when the sanctions came, he said it'd take months to work. Well, the Ukrainian people cannot wait months. The world cannot wait months if we sit by and watch innocent people being murdered.
The Ukrainians need more of the weapons we've been giving them. They need to start getting them faster. And they also need new capabilities like long-range ATACMS, larger drones, and tanks. Not all of these weapons need to come from America. Make no mistake, our allies are looking to us for signals. President Biden should be clear with Western Europe about the need for them to make meaningful, specific contributions to Ukraine and to do it quickly.